Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us go to work, we find sometimes there's a little bit of leisure time, so we perceive, or maybe the boss isn't looking over our shoulder, so we decide to send out a personal email. Well, you can also find yourself, when you do something like that, into a little bit of trouble, much as our ex-Portland police chief found out when he was caught sending sexy emails to somebody on the other end on public office time. Well, if you're one of those out there that decide that you want to use your email, IM, text, and social media personally while you're at work, you might want to consider some of the things that can keep you safe from scandal and personal harm. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a leading productivity expert and CEO of GetControl.net. He is the lead author of the book, The Hamster Revolution, How to Manage Your Email Before It Manages You. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mike Song. Mike,
hey, it's great to be here. I'm excited to be on the air with you and also being recorded for podcasts and all the other great things you do.
You better believe it. I believe in putting myself out there. You know, forget all about the sneaking around email stuff. So what's going on here? I mean, we hear about scandal all the time. You got Hillary Clinton, you know, CIA, you name it, and these people you think are pretty intelligent, but somehow they're getting caught doing things they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, they're getting caught off guard, and I think that's what email does to us. It puts us in different emotional places. We're usually alone or in a cubicle somewhere where we think, you know, we're kind of having a private conversation, and the reality is quite different. It's an almost permanent record of our lives that doesn't really disappear even when we hit the delete button. So one of our, rallying call messages is to really think about your email differently, to really make some big changes in the way you kind of get up every day and do your work and also in your personal life.
Now, it's interesting. Now, talk about the three things that you absolutely should not be sending when it comes to social media, email, you name it.
Well, I mean, the first one is definitely anything that even has a hint of anger in it. I think an angry digital message is a bad digital message. We all do get angry. We get upset with people. But what I've seen happen over and over again is the message seems reasonable at the moment you press send. And it's in the moments after where you realize you went kind of over the top, Daniel. So I see this amazing kind of thing happen where as you're typing the message, you're thinking, I can't wait to hit send. And after you hit send, you suddenly are filled with remorse and regret, and you feel like now you got to really face this person. Of course, on the other end of the tube, the person gets the message, and they read and reread and reread and forward it to a bunch of people that may or may not know you. It's a chain reaction that we don't think about when we're trying to express anger. So it's obviously a recommendation not to ever send a message like that. At least wait 24 hours before you let that emotion creep in. And we've seen equally kind of regretful messages going out for people who are sending something that's funny to them but might not be funny to others, or they're effusively maybe praising somebody after a couple drinks or something like that, and it comes across a little bit more as you're flirting with an employee or you're saying something inappropriate. So we look at this emotional content of emails as being the most dangerous for people's careers, which is one of the things I'm really mostly concerned about, is that one email can be your career-limiting move. And so it makes sense to put the filter up big time, more than you would think. And then that's our message, is go exaggerate it the other way. Be careful about what you say in your messages.
Well, what's interesting is I deal a lot with comments that I get, for instance, on YouTube, the conversation thread. So the one key goal that I generally have when it comes to that thread is when somebody sends a message or a message, is it within the context of what this conversation is about? In other words, does it actually promote it in a way that we actually have a discussion about the topic? As we all know, we've experienced what they call trolls, people who just get on there and blather dirty language, or whatever it is that have no relevance whatsoever. And, of course, thank God, YouTube decided to change that by letting you trash those comments so they don't need to be in the thread in the first place. But as many of us who have been on YouTube long enough, we realize, wait a minute, there are those from the past. But anyway, what happens is, sometimes you'll get people that'll send you stuff, and I like what you're saying here about the emotional response, that a lot of times when you come from that place, you're more likely going to write something that really isn't going to be a good thing. So like for me, what I'll do is I'll kind of like throw it out there and I'll write just what's on my mind at the moment, but I don't send anything. Then I take a look and say, okay, now how can I turn this around and make them more responsible for the comment that they just gave me that's related to what we're talking about?
Yeah.
And it's pretty easy when you do that, when you turn it around. In other words, so let's say, for instance, there was a conversation thread about cancer, about a particular interview that we did about cancer and how to prevent it, that sort of a thing, and somebody comes on there and bam, 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 they're doing their thing. So then I take a look at that and I say, okay, now, is this person with this particular thread actually solving the problem or giving more information to the people who see, hear, and read about this interview, giving them hope or direction to be able to help solve their problem? And if they don't, then I ask them specifically, what about what you just sent me is helping people resolve their problem? It's really amazing when you turn it around and make them responsible. They'll either be more proactive and do exactly what you're hoping they'll do, or you'll never hear from them again.
Yeah, and I think the second big area that ties right into the trollosphere that we've all grown to kind of look at with almost a sense of really this is just kind of one of the lowest areas of human communication. It is almost always taking some incident and moving into an area that I call conjecture. So conjecture is a really, really nebulous, vague, it's a very, very kind of obtuse area, and that's a second big pillar of danger. The conjecture would be, well, I guess this person, maybe you don't like a person because of their political stripe or where they're from or who they are. Well, they're probably also, and then that's conjecture, right? They probably would do this, or they're probably capable of that. That kind of conjecture is just terrible for your own personal reputation. And you'll notice that the more anonymous the website is and the more politically polarized it is, you will tend to see conjecture running more and more wild, imagining, that a political figure hates America so much they want to destroy it. That's all they do. They get up every day. That's what I bet they want to do. Until the person starts to actually believe, that that's true. It's a really fascinating thing because essentially what it does is it allows this sort of a subconscious part of yourself to run free. Now that may be something you do anonymously as a troll. I wouldn't recommend it, but boy, if you're doing that at work, even at a much more calm degree than what we see on YouTube, for example, as you say, it is still a terrible thing because that conjecture really tweaks people. It gets people upset. It draws lawsuits. We have defended or worked with companies that have defended themselves in multi-million-dollar lawsuits based on a scientist just wondering about a side effect to a drug. And you had mentioned the healthcare issues like cancer and fighting cancer. Well, this scientist was saying maybe there is a tie between our drug and this problem. That he had no idea, he was just wondering about it. Well, years later, this was used as a part of a lawsuit, and it was very interesting to the company because they said this guy didn't even know what he was talking, wasn't even involved with this research, but his conjecture cost us millions of dollars because of the way he worded it. So that's another huge area, this idea of imagining how bad someone is or how bad a situation is when you don't really know. So I'd stay away from that too. And the third area that I think of as being really dangerous is what I call sort of gray area topics. Topics that you think you're not over the line, but you're kind of close to it. Maybe I should say this, maybe I should not. That's usually a no. I usually would recommend not saying it. So those are the three big areas: the emotions, the conjecture, and the grayness of an issue. If you think it's somewhere in a blurry area of appropriateness, the discretion is the better part of is the wise path to take.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. I decided to, as you were talking about all that, go ahead and pop into my YouTube account, and sure enough, I got a new comment on a video here, if you're interested in kind of tackling this one a little bit. And this one here is really interesting because it's about call it a life-changing process called Site K. It was something we did an interview on. This was several months ago, or it could have been actually about a year ago. Now, this video of our particular interview here has close to 40,000 views. A very huge like-to-dislike ratio. In other words, there's a lot more people that like it than dislike it. Mm-hmm. But here's the comment. So it really comes back to let me see here. I'm going to go ahead and see if I get the right one, the one that I have to approve. So it started off, notice that Site K has a registered trademark next to it. It equals Huckster. Anybody selling this stuff, should be considered to be a scam artist, so to speak. And so basically, if this stuff works, as he claims, he's saying that it should be taught in schools instead of charging people thousands of dollars, just like pharmaceutical companies do with a pill, when the pills literally are made for pennies. Okay, so he's got two arguments going on about why this is something people should be skeptical about. Then another person replies to it that they agree with this comment. Now, again, these are some nice, lucid comments that I don't have a problem throwing in there, even if they're negative, because, as they say, even negative publicity is good publicity, and the language is clean. But, again, it's going back to, for instance, I remember when I first responded to this, you have a very interesting observation about all of this, was the way that I responded to it, and it was kind of interesting in that respect to think that, that's sometimes a stance that you have to take, then as I went on in this one, it seems that you have been duped. Site K is relatively easy to learn and fairly simple to apply without spending any money, just some of your time and commitment. Give it a try. It was all I said.
Yeah.
And he never replied to that, but somebody else replied to his comment to agree with him, with the same kind of a thing. But I kept it civil, and I said, look, give it a try. Maybe you're just not really as familiar with it as you believe you are from this interview, sort of a thing. But, would that be the standard kind of an etiquette to deal with something like that?
Yeah, I think there's two really great things about your response, and I think is well worth noting, and they're hard. They're counterintuitive, right? If you're being attacked, if you're being trolled, if someone seems to have aggressively come across your pathway at work in a way that's really just rubbing you the wrong way, take Daniel's response. Be positive like you are. And I think you said something along the line. Well, that's interesting. That is one of the most powerful conflict resolution phrases that you can use, whether you're arguing with someone at Thanksgiving dinner who's got the opposite view from you. Interesting. I have to think about that. Give me something to think about. I mean, it doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you think they're smart. It doesn't compromise you, but it gives you that way to not turn it into this terrible gnashing of two people together in a way that probably won't solve anyone's problems. So I thought you handled it really well. It's the second thing about it that's really strikes me about your response is it's persuasive to me. You're remaining positive, so I can't turn troll on you, and at work, that's what you want to make sure you do. You don't want to have the guy in accounting, just feeling like you're a complete loser and telling everybody about it, and you can make him look bad by taking that high road, and you become more persuasive, I think, and that's the counterintuitive part about, right? The less hard you hit back in your email messages, in your text messages, instant messages, social media, things like YouTube, the more upbeat you are and willing to say that their opinion is interesting, the more credible you instantly sound. It's almost like you sit back and you say, wow, the credible person here is Daniel.
Exactly. And again, you put the responsibility for their comment back onto them. As soon as you, I think, argue or you trash back, you're assuming responsibility of what they've done, and therefore you're buying or owning their content. And so I just don't usually like to play that way too well.
I think it's great. It's great.
Now,
people do stew on these things
social
forever.
Media, it's really interesting because back when people were starting to get in trouble for instance, the teacher that has posted a picture of them with a pint of ale in their hands, the next thing you know, they're out of a job. And people crying about the fact that, well, I thought this was supposed to be a private device. Geez, it's over the internet. What do you think? It's a big social media. You might want to consider how private that's going to be, I guess. But the fact is they still continue to get upset with the fact that they're getting caught for things that they post on social media. It's like, haven't you learned that Mark Zuckerberg really doesn't care about your privacy? Have you learned this yet? I mean, because he's stupidly saying over and over, well, I don't know if I'm going to allow companies to have access to this private information that it's supposed to be private. I don't know what I want to do. My opinion is I don't post anything on any social media that has to do with my personal life whatsoever.
Yeah, it is definitely public. I mean, digital is public. If it's electronic, it's public, and that's probably the best way to think of these types of things. So I think you're right about that, and being circumspect makes a lot of sense. I think they're all fun. Social media is fun. Instant messaging, text messaging. If you think of the explosion of channels and how they tend to be, interestingly enough, in the corporate world, I do a lot of work in the Global 1000 companies. They manage stuff down to the nth degree, in terms of policies and procedures and best practices. But when it comes to just the management of all the communication channels that have now exploded, so a typical person might be working on text, instant messaging, email, some type of internal social media tool like Jabber or Yammer. There are an explosion of things like Skype for Business, which now combines webcam with instant messaging, a desktop share function. I mean, if you think of the number of channels and how little advice you actually really get on what to use when and what is in and what is out in terms of acceptability, it's very interesting because it's the biggest process that occurs in a company, and it's the most unmanaged one. And yet these companies manage other processes like manufacturing or marketing down to the nth degree, So it's really, I think, a wonderful opportunity to talk about and help people with.
I think when this interview opportunity came across my desk, it was really an interesting one because I can just hear people in my background, in my mind as I'm thinking about this whole thing, thinking to themselves or even saying maybe to friends around the water cooler, how dare my boss look into my emails? And I'm thinking, but wait a minute here. You're on company time on a company computer. They got the right, in my opinion, to look at anything they want to. Now, tell us a little bit more about that.
It is fascinating because that is exactly how you feel like it's my inbox, and why is my boss able to look at it? Well, a lot of times it may not be your boss, but the IT department has unfettered access to your email and is legally allowed to look at any message you've sent or received. And increasingly, we're starting to see that organizations that are worried about workplace violence, for example, will even monitor the keystrokes of people. And you can kind of see why. I mean, if you've got a person that's very upset and they're sending stuff off their work computer that is violent or, that could get the company in big trouble, then that's one way that they can find you. So even if you're on your own private Gmail account, but you're on your laptop or tablet for work, I would still feel like there was people watching you type some of that stuff out, possibly, unless you're in a very small company, obviously that might be different. But yes, so you're right. Everything's public. When you're on your work computer, you could be being watched by 7 people. Would you still type that same message to your friend, or send the dirty joke or whatever it is you're going to put out there? Probably not.
Now, here's something that's really interesting, too. Now, I understand that as you delete this email, that can be actually a very scary proposition.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting process. Now, one of the funny things is that about 80% of the Global 1000 is on Microsoft Office. When you delete an email from your inbox, it goes into your deleted folder. Actually, it doesn't get deleted at all. It's a very it's a very kind of funny thing because people will be trying to clean up the amount of email in terms of megabytes they have, and they just delete it, goes into their deleted folder, doesn't even delete. But beyond that, if you do permanently delete it, it really still, there's no guarantee that's not easily recoverable via the kind of backup that organizations do, via a forensic, a person that could easily go into a computer and find something that was deleted. It literally doesn't really ever necessarily disappear, and that's why you'll see when there's a terrorist, act or some type of horrible crime, they go to that computer. Yeah, of course the person's cleared their browsing history, deleted this email or that email, but they can almost always dig them right back up again. And not to mention that the cloud itself is where information is actually stored, and that's not even inside your computer. Everything in your computer is really up in the air somewhere, moving in bits and bytes around the world. So it is it's scary, really, when you think about it. And I think we're just at the beginning of what hackers, nefarious people out there who are kind of lurking are going to try to do with this kind of information. And as secure as people tell you it is, we hear about it being hacked every day, don't we? So that's why I think with regards to managing your email, it was interesting. We were asked to go and do a talk for the Obama administration when he first came into office. We've done work with very, very conservative politicians. We do work with conservative news media and liberal news media outlets, and everybody. It's just one of these what I kind of like about what we do. It's universal. It's really, I guess, bipartisan or whatever you would want to call it. Everyone's got to worry about this because this can get you and hurt your career. It can really hurt your income. And those are the saddest stories of all that I hear.
Yeah, and it's funny that people actually act surprised when it happens. That's what blows my mind. Because it isn't like you go to your friend and you say, I've got a secret, can I trust that you'll keep it? There's a slight chance that person's going to run their mouth anyway. That just seems to be human nature when there seems to be, I don't know, whatever it is, that thing you're holding on to and you just got to let it go. It's another thing, too. You write a love letter to somebody, you hand it to them. There's a chance that letter might be found by someone else, but these are two areas that, to me, are very low on the threat scale. Mm-hmm. But an email, when you send that out, you really don't know where that's all going to go and who's going to maybe accidentally forward it to somebody else, and so it's not in your control. So, really, when you think about this in context and realize, geez, I really ought to be careful about what I'm saying, even if it's my personal email and I'm not at work. These are just, to me, some really reasonable things and etiquettes that you should be following.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we're kind of in this era right now where it's exploding. So, it's almost every week, because I monitor it, that there's a scandal that's related to email being unearthed, from Hillary Clinton to Sony. Sony had that big thing. The CIA director's email got hacked. And it's not like they found something that was horrible in any of those things, but it really gave people a lot of, the nerves, the sleepless nights when you know that everything is going to be out there is a really terrible feeling. So, yeah, I think that is, I think, a critical thing. The other interesting aspect of all of this explosion in digital media channels, to me, is fascinating, is the efficiency or effective use of the technology. Also, relatively unmanaged. They tell you how to use it. They show you a few things. But in almost every audience I'm in front of, after we talk about the etiquette, this being circumspect, being smart about your email, we talk about the efficiency of it. And we realize there that just the squandering of hours and hours of time of people doing it the worst way possible is more common than not. And so we're seeing something like on the order of 7 hours a week that are attributed to being wasted on the way that people use technology, particularly in email or virtual meetings. It's 7 hours per week is what our data is showing, and it's another area where we help people get them out of trouble and then get them moving forward, getting more done by being smart about the way they manage their digital email, how they store it, how they write it, how they file it, how they filter it. All of those things are way, way down on the priority list for companies. They should be right up at the top.
Now, I understand that there might be one key question that a person might be able to use in their email, sort of an anti-hacker before they hit the send button. Can you tell us what that would be?
Well, the question is really more for themselves. And the question is, if this was on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow, if this was on a 24-hour news channel, would I be 100% comfortable with this message? And so in that sense,
could this cause scandal?
Yeah, exactly. Or do I pause? Now, there's going to be, I think, a few things that your brain's going to transmit back to you. One is that, yeah, I'm going to feel really uncomfortable, and we can say, that's fairly obvious. What's not so obvious is when you just have a feeling about it, and you can't quite put your finger on why your brain seems to be telling you to be a little hesitant about hitting send. But that's what I want you to grasp onto, that moment where you feel like, I'm not sure why this person deserves to get this message, or I'm allowed to say this kind of thing, but there's something in me that just says. And usually what it is that you're just not thinking of a particular kind of person that could get hold of that message. That's the hard one. That's the one that ends a career in a flash. Someone sent a dirty joke. I still remember he said he sent a dirty joke to a friend at a company who worked at the same company, and he hit send. He had that feeling, hit send, and what it was that he had loaded the wrong email into the to line. He had loaded someone else's email, and he sent the joke to another person who forwarded this joke on to hundreds of people in the company. Stupid. So it was a moment he had. He couldn't figure out why he hit send, and then he realized, I sent it to the wrong Jim. I sent it to Jim B. I sent it to Jim C. And he lost his job. So I think those are the kinds of moments where, if I could help anyone, it would be in that area to save a career and keep your performance being the thing that moves you forward instead of your email blunders that pull you backwards.
And the best thing, too, is one of your solutions to all this, too, is that you really need to harbor your emotions. In other words, keep them in check as you have a response and make sure that there isn't a whole lot of emotional content. I know that sometimes my wife deals with that. She'll get an email from somebody and she'll come dragging me in. What do you think about this? And she reads maybe a lot of anger into it. And I'll take a look back and I'll say, well, it's because it's my fresh perspective and I'm not in the mix of the conversation. I look at it and go, well, okay, here's the key points this person's trying to make. Let's just remove the anger, the emotional reaction to this in the first place. What key things are they really trying to convey to you? And that's what you respond to. You don't respond to it emotionally. And so, as you suggest, take an anger management timeout or scream into your pillow, whatever the case is, but do something that doesn't translate onto the email and then you hit send.
Absolutely, and it will ruin your day to send an angry email too. I mean, it will ruin your day, and that's the interesting feedback that I got from people is that they said that after they sent the email out, now they were stressed out. They knew they're going to have to see the person tomorrow in the team meeting. It's going to be so awkward. They don't sleep well that night. They wake up cranky. It really doesn't help your case at all. I think you're more credible if you take that positive spin on it, like you said. And what your wife is probably doing is what we all would naturally do, and we would read it, reread it, and maybe read it again. And that we think is really what happens with the angry email. It gets magnified 3 or 4 times because it's getting, you get a little more ticked off each time you read it.
Sure.
And that's a problem. And another thing we coach people on too is if they're not understanding somebody and you notice a trend in your communications, you send them a message, they don't get it, so you get frustrated. This is what I'm trying to say. You really should be on a live phone or at least an instant messaging thing where you can have more back and forth because that diffuses anger, whereas email, it tends to be, I hit it over the net to you, and then you read it for a day even, getting more and more upset, versus if I'm on the phone with you, you can say, I think you're overreacting, and I'll be like, oh, whoa, maybe I should calm this down. People do say things in email that they would never say in a live conversation.
Right.
And that's a great indicator, too, that you're needing to pull back and be less emotional, as you say.
Now, it's interesting and kind of summing this all up, too, that when it comes to you receiving an email, or much as I was sharing earlier about the YouTube threads, that you also don't have to reply to these things at all. And an interesting example was some years ago, is that I got this, to me, it was kind of an ugly email from a supervisor that seemed to be dumping all this personal stuff about why they're not happy with my performance. And it was funny because these were things I'd never heard from anybody before in the realm of the kind of work that I was doing. And so here I looked at this, and this long litany of nonsense is really what it was. And so I looked at that. Of course it pissed me off. And it would have been easy to email back, but I decided, you know what? I'm not even going to respond or do anything. I'm going to let her come to me. And that's exactly what happened. And I said, I want to talk to you about that email. I thought you were way out of line. I could say whatever I want to now. Because it's just between her and me. It's not on an email. There's no way to prove I ever said those things unless a witness was standing there. So there you go. But the bottom line is it's interesting, too, even in the context of the YouTube thread, where sometimes I won't reply to something negative, but then I'll find other people will. And they'll do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll just sit back and just kind of enjoy the show.
Yeah, I think we all envy the person in a lot, and say who speaks their mind. I'm just a straight shooter, or they come out and they say, I don't want to be politically correct. I'm just going to shoot from the hip, and we kind of admire that in people to some extent. But in reality, the more I've observed those types of communications and followed the pathway that they seem to take, the more convinced I am that taking a positive spin on things is better for your personal well-being and your career well-being. And so I think that is a better way to go. And like you said, if you're going to knock heads with someone, be in the room with them like you said. Be right there, look in their eyes and say, really, that's how you feel, And if they say something over the top, then you can always say, well, let's write these things down. If you really feel that I'm, doing a terrible job, as you say, let's, you can almost say to them, well, why don't you document that? Because I disagree with you, but I want, let's put this down together and find someone who can really figure out who's not delivering here. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. It can be a very strong position to be in when you're there with them, particularly if they're kind of convince themselves that there's no way that you're right, and you show up rational, clear-headed, clear-eyed, open to compromise. I think that position wins 9 times out of 10.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Mike, it's been really a pleasure to have you here on the program about a topic like this. I'm sure a lot of people will be responding to this one here, and so I'm kind of excited to see what kind of reaction it'll take. But in the meantime, where's the website people can find more about the Hamster Revolution book that you've authored and other things?
Well, we're at getcontrol.net, getcontrol.net, and we do all kinds of corporate training, from email efficiency, email etiquette, meeting efficiency and etiquette, and we even show people how to store digital information so they can really find it fast. People are really struggling to find stuff, so all of that is there. And our team training is really our specialty. We love to have everyone on the team, that person that gave you a hard time, and you, and everybody else, so we can come to an agreement on how this team's going to communicate at the next level. So thank you so much for having me, Daniel. I love your show, and really excited to have been on it as a guest.
Well, like I said, I'm looking forward to the thread after this. Mike, again, thanks for being on the program today.
All right, you take care. Have a wonderful day.
Will do. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. So there you go. When it comes to sending out that email, just be sure that what you're sending out doesn't have anything that could potentially be personally damaging. After all, that can ruin your day a lot faster than speaking your mind, that's for sure. You can also discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to subscribe to our free weekly e-newsletter as well. We can also be followed on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.